This video will discuss the rhetorical analysis essay, an unusual type of essay assignment in which you will read an argument written by an accomplished, persuasive writer, and then discuss how effective you think she or he was in making her his argument. The purpose of this type of essay is to teach you to think critically about the ways in which a writer puts forward an argument, with the ultimate goal of helping you write stronger arguments on your own in the future. We'll begin with a quick overview of what the rhetorical analysis essay looks like. The rhetorical analysis essay is an essay based on a single argumentative text. It analyzes the structure of the argument and the strategies used by the author of the text. It also assesses how well the author proves her or his claim using the evidence provided, and it presents an opinion regarding how convincing the argument is or is not. A very important note, and this is where a lot of students go wrong with this type of essay, is that the writer of this type of essay analyzes the argument made in the selected text. The essay does not make an argument about the same issue. It also does not give the student's opinion about the issue discussed by the writer of the argument, the text being analyzed. The focus of this video is on what exactly you will do in writing a rhetorical analysis essay. Throughout this video, I'll be pulling some examples from this article from the New York Times titled, "Health Leaders Must Focus on the Threats from Factory Farms." If you're a student in my class, you've already been assigned to complete this reading, but if you haven't done so already, make sure that you've read this article so that you can follow everything we'll be covering here. Before we get into exactly what you're going to write in a rhetorical analysis essay, we're going to very quickly review some information on rhetorical strategies and techniques. I covered this information in a separate video titled The Fundamentals of Argumentative Writing, and students in my class have already been assigned to view this video as well. But if you haven't done so already, make sure you viewed that video and that you have a clear understanding of everything that's covered there. In writing the rhetorical analysis essay, you'll be identifying and commenting on each of these components in the argument you analyze. Remember that in order for an argument to be an argument, it must contain at least three things: a stated problem it is addressing, which we term the issue, a proposed solution, also known as a claim, and some form of evidence that shows why the proposed solution should be accepted. Remember, too, that evidence was defined as facts and ideas writers cannot disagree with, even if they disagree with the argument in its totality. And remember that we said evidence can be composed of anything the audience will accept as proof of the claim, but evidence can be classified into four categories: data, irrefutable facts, expert testimony, and anecdote. Examining and evaluating the type of evidence used in support of an argument's claim can tell you a lot about the strength of an argument and can be a rich source of content for a rhetorical analysis essay. The video Fundamentals of Argumentative Writing also touched upon some optional components of an argument. It is very likely that you'll find some of these optional components in published arguments. One that you're likely to find is background information, which was defined as an explanation about how the problem arose, who it affects, and why it's important, where a writer often seeks to make readers care about the problem and why it's important to the writer. And as an example, we looked at the paragraph on the history of agriculture from the article Health Leaders Should Focus on the Risks from Factory Farms. We also discussed counterargument and refutation, and while this is often an overlooked rhetorical strategy in many published arguments, it is not uncommon to see. In the video, we looked at the example from the article about tuition-free college. And two other strategies we looked at were the use of ethos, the ways in which a writer establishes credibility, and pathos, in which a writer seeks to make the reader feel strong emotion about the issue. Now we'll look at the ways to go about organizing a rhetorical analysis essay. The first thing to know about organizing a rhetorical analysis essay is that these types of essays have two parts that do very different things: a summary of the argument and the text you're analyzing, and an analysis of the argument. We'll discuss these separately, beginning with the argument summary. Your summary of the argument will be done in the first paragraph of the rhetorical analysis essay. In your argument summary, you'll include an opening sentence that states the title and the author of the text and the argument's primary claim, usually as the essay's first sentence. A thorough summary of the evidence presented in support of the claim, along with other rhetorical strategies utilized, such as counterargument and refutation and appeals to pathos. Here, summarize the argument, not the information. And a thesis statement that provides your assessment of the argument's effectiveness. Next, we'll look at each of these three components in a little more detail. It is strongly recommended that you start your rhetorical analysis essay using the following sentence frame, which begins with the word "in," followed by the title of the argument correctly punctuated with quotation marks around it, followed by the author's first and last name, then followed by a tag word, a verb that tells what the author is doing, such as argues, claims, or asserts, and then a summary of the author's claim. Here's an example of the opening sentence for a rhetorical analysis essay based on Health Leaders Must Focus on the Threats from Factory Farms. In Health Leaders Must Focus on the Threats from Factory Farms, Scott Weathers, Sophie Hermans, and Mark Bittman argue that the new leader of the World Health Organization should take steps to eliminate factory farms around the world, which the authors claim lead to poor diets that promote disease, antibiotic disease-resistant bacteria, the result of the use of antibiotics on livestock, and increases in greenhouse gas emissions. After the opening sentence, you'll write a summary of how the author went about making the argument, providing a thorough summary of the evidence presented in support of the claim, along with other rhetorical strategies utilized, such as counterargument and refutation and appeals to pathos. Here, maintain the focus on summarizing the argument, not the information. The last thing you'll include in your summary of the argument is your own thesis statement that gives your assessment of the argument's effectiveness in a single declarative sentence. Your thesis statement should provide an overview of what your analysis will include. You could offer praise or criticism of the argument, and you may do both. Here's an example thesis statement, again from an essay based on Health Leaders Must Focus on the Threats from Factory Farms. In general, I find the author's argument in favor of WHO action on climate change to be convincing because of their use of irrefutable data proving links between factory farming and the spread of disease, but I found the author's failure to clearly explain the role of the WHO and the specific links between farming and greenhouse gas emissions to be problematic. Here's a visual rendering of how to go about writing the first paragraph of a rhetorical analysis essay. Start with the opening sentence using the fill-in-the-blank sentence frame, then provide a summary of the argument, and conclude with a thesis statement that gives your assessment of the argument's effectiveness. If you're a student in my class, you'll find an example rhetorical analysis essay posted in Canvas, and I strongly recommend reading and studying this example very carefully. Students often tell me that the example essays are extremely helpful as they set out to complete the essay assignments. If you haven't done so already, pause the video and read the first paragraph of the example rhetorical analysis essays so that you can see examples of the components of the rhetorical analysis essay we've been discussing here. Notice that the first paragraph of this example rhetorical analysis essay begins with a recommended fill-in-the-blank sentence frame, highlighted here in green, followed by a thorough summary of the argument that references specific rhetorical strategies, highlighted in yellow, followed finally by the thesis statement that provides the assessment of the argument, highlighted in blue. Now we'll discuss the analysis portion of the essay, which will constitute the vast majority of what you write. The argument analysis will constitute the body of your essay. The analysis will include at least 6 paragraphs, and it will be extensive, coming in at around 800 words minimum. You'll identify at least 3 separate rhetorical strategies employed by the author and devote at least 2 paragraphs to describing each of them and commenting upon how effectively you feel they're used. Here, you might include both praise and criticism of the argument, and it's really encouraged that you do both, provided that you really do feel that the argument falls short in some ways, as most arguments inevitably do. Offering both praise and criticism of an argument shows engagement and critical thinking, which is really what this assignment is all about. You can also include a conclusion, but it is optional. If you include one, briefly summarize both the author's argument and your analysis of it. Here's a visual rendering of how to go about writing a body paragraph of a rhetorical analysis essay. Sometime early in the paragraph, name the strategy. Then, give an example of how that strategy is used. For example, you might provide a quote or a paraphrase that reflects how the author used the strategy. Then finally, give your opinion on how effectively you think that strategy was used. We'll return now to the example essay. Again, if you haven't already read the entire example essay, pause the video and read it. This analysis paragraph from the example essay is developed in the manner described a few moments ago. A rhetorical strategy is identified, the use of irrefutable data is evidence, then an example of that irrefutable data is provided, the fact that 500,000 people die per year because of the overconsumption of red meat, and finally there is a commentary on how effectively the writer of the essay feels the strategy was used. The last thing we'll discuss in this video is a process for going about writing a rhetorical analysis essay, what to do first, second, and so on. Here's a list of steps it is recommended you take in order in setting out to complete a rhetorical analysis essay. First, read the entire text you select. then reread it and analyze its structure. Next, identify the rhetorical techniques used and highlight them in different colors. Take notes as you reread. You may want to complete an outline. Write the essay's introduction paragraph. Write the opening sentence that states the source's title, author, and primary claim. Write one sentence summarizing each rhetorical strategy identified. Then identify 3 rhetorical strategies to focus on. Create an outline for the body paragraphs. And finally, write the body paragraphs. It is also strongly recommended that you highlight and annotate the text you're going to base a rhetorical analysis essay on, identifying the author's claim, evidence, any background information, a counterargument, refutation, and so on. That concludes this video on the rhetorical analysis essay.